All right. Well, thanks, Mariah. I am just launching up my screen, so tell me when you can see it in
We
presentation
can,
mode.
we can see your screen, not in presentation mode yet. There we go. You're in, what does it look like? Notes. There you go. Beautiful.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you, Mariah. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this with you. It's my first time doing a webinar with you all. And when I was speaking with Aaron and Tom, this topic came up, and it was an exciting one because I've spent a bunch of my last several years at Mayo Clinic helping expand our function to where it started to where it is now. So. Um, One of the things that crossed my mind is that it's an interesting kind of paradox because if you're here today, somebody probably was successful at pitching BRM to someone in your organization by virtue of the fact that you're a BRM. If there are several of you that are not and several of you that are consultants, then that might not be the whole audience. But I think what I found is that there are people that are in organizations where their CIO is replaced and the new CIO didn't have a BRM in their previous organization. So they're effectively kind of having to resell the value of what they do. There's places where people are BRMs in a role. And this really is a commitment to think about, well, how do you just dedicate people to it? So, just to put a little context to it, I realize that several of you might say, how do I apply this? But that's kind of some thinking that I had. Just 30 seconds on me. I'm an engineer by education. I spent my first years in Big Four consulting, and then I did a couple of startups, and then as a vice president at a large healthcare vendor. That was my first 18 years. The last 18 years I've been at Mayo Clinic, went to work for the customer, if you will. And during that period of time, CIO of one of our regions, and then really have been asked by Chris Ross, our current CIO, to really take and own this function. He was real committed to broadly what he would call the customer organization. We've learned language matters, and we use the word business partner a lot, and we're on that journey as an organization. But I've spent the last several years. I own this amongst a couple of other functions. So that's me. Um, oops. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Mayo Clinic because I'm not sure that a few of you are maybe from the healthcare provider market sector, different than payer, different than life sciences, et cetera. So I'll tell a little bit about that because it'll at least give you a context for who our organization is. As literally I may have evolved this, and then I've kind of used this. Maybe there's a little bit of a cliche that sometimes people capture in business, which is, what problem are we trying to solve? But to tee this up, to make the case for BRM, I've got some context there that I think helps, and then there's sort of three main sort of points in the body, which are literally what is the value of BRM. So it's not just what's the value of doing important and high valued IT projects, it's what's the value of a BRM being in the middle of that process with our business partners. A couple of additional thoughts, and then I'll just make a few comments about the upcoming BRM event in October. Mayo Clinic, we get rankings by U.S. News and World Report, and I couldn't actually capture how many years it's been running, but it's maybe one of sort of our proud points in industry. And many times our current CEO doesn't use the words best practices or industry leading. He uses the term category of one. So bear with me if that's not meant to sound arrogant. It's just meant that there are certain things about Mayo Clinic that we think are actually a bit different. And IT is in a place of having to support almost kind of two different organizations from our department. So the context here of outpatient visits, et cetera. I would put this in the context of saying 17.9 billion. We are not the absolute behemoth. There are a lot of bigger health systems across multiple states than we are, but we're not a community hospital. We have many community hospitals sort of in our umbrella, in our family. We're 76,000 employees. The IT department's around 3,000. I got a brother-in-law who worked for Wells Fargo, and theirs was 30. So, that's staggering of a number for us. But I know many health system sites often have IT departments of 3, 4, 500, and this will be a challenge because they're going to have to figure out how do they put a BRM in place versus, some others. We're located in 4 locations, and we have IT spread across all of them. We're a virtual IT organization. And since COVID, we have, as you'd say, we've not gone back. Our hybrid is in the form of we have space where we can get together, but we still are supporting a very active virtual IT community. I made a couple of comments on this already, so I'll kind of skip through that slide. As far as BRM is concerned, we have geographic BRMs or site BRMs, and you kind of see those folks kind of situated around kind of our main core. And then Rochester is really sort of our main campus. And inside of Rochester, there's several clinical services that we have BRMs identified. So you can kind of take a look down the list here. Some of this may look kind of foreign if you're really not from the healthcare provider sector, but you can see we've established a pretty solid team of 12 to 15 people, and some support, a couple of support resources. And those folks vary in several, and we've got job family for BRM that's actually got 4 levels to it. These are the areas of our business where we don't have dedicated people. I consider them, these people are card-carrying BRMs. It's their job description that they use in our HR system. These are business partner areas where someone who does a day job, they lead a piece of our applications business, or they, are responsible for some other component, and they, as part of that job, they manage the relationship with these areas. We're still have targets to grow into these spaces, and some of what I'm going to say today is a little bit of the story about even recently. I'm going to expand to one of these areas, and this is part of the message that I used. And these are the individuals outside of those areas that are actually covering many of those places we don't have a committed dedicated card-carrying BRM. So you can kind of see they're broken down in a number of kind of different categories. So that was the flying shot through my introduction and through Mayo Clinic in 11 minutes. So now let's get on to the topic of today. I put these next couple of slides together around sort of what's the problem we're trying to solve, because I think most of us know that whether you call it a burning platform or whatever, there's something that generally suggests why we want to propose a solution. So the solution is to something. And if we think about the business, you can see a number of things on the table here about IT being too expensive. Do we really get the payback from IT? Is there service delivery where we really want it to be? How do we turn IT into moving from the department of no to the department of how? Frankly, at different times, all of these statements have been statements that, I've heard at my clients before I was an employee of Mayo Clinic and after coming to Mayo Clinic. But then as you kind of get down here, you see things like we need IT to be a bigger contributor to the solution. They know what they're doing with other business partners, other internal departments, and we hope we can leverage some of that to avoid costs. Well, that's not necessarily sort of a criticism. It's kind of a desire or an outlook for something. And then ultimately, I just, there's variants on that I could have shared. But ultimately, this last CEO was sort of a great boost for BRM because he said, I want IT to be an ally to the business. What does ally mean? Well, I want IT to come forward and say, what do you think is part of the solution? What do you think we should do to solve this problem? Previously, we had leaders that said, the clinical practice needs to lead. And I guess if you were going to consider the partnership, you'd probably say, well, the clinical practice gets a 51% vote and IT, contributes a 49% vote. It's maybe a little bit oversimplified. So, but it's more than it was. And so that's a bit of the foundation to say, well, if these are the kinds of things you're hearing from the business, you want to take those obviously into context. The next, sorry, I'm in a little trouble here. The next one is I sort of looked at it now, not just from the IT side, but from the service provider side. At Mayo Clinic, we don't use the word provider because those are people that care for patients. That's actually the customer. So to use the word service provider, which is a a good descriptor in BRM Institute language. We're talking about IT here, and IT might say, "I wish I had more time too." And here's a whole bunch of things that they wish I had time to do, but I think, to be honest, I'd really need some more experience in training to be able to add to the event or add to the customer or add to those things. I know technology well, but I don't really know as much about sort of the day-to-day workings of the business. I have a day job running an IT application service team. Maybe I'd say, just confidentially, I don't know that I want to publish this, but it's really not my interest. It's not why I went into IT. It feels kind of like an IT sales position, and I like the tech side. Another person might say, confidentially, I just don't know that I feel that confident. I, figuring out how to, handle and do some of these things are just not my strength. And where do I start? And if I meet with somebody and I hold a meeting and we say we ought to kind of follow up and do that, am I going to be able to? Can I keep pace with that work? And this last one was a real big deal, and it was part of how we sort of pitched BRM and our organization, because we said we do a lot of data points. We connect with people, but we generally aren't as good at following through because there's just other commitments. I used to say that most of our leaders, if I'd say, guess, how much time do you spend separate from just managing and doing what you're doing to deliver software, do upgrades, et cetera, just engaged with the business, understanding what they do, understanding how you get a feed from them. And their answer was generally day a week, maybe a little bit more. If we ran a 2-day retreat, okay, well, that maybe counts for 2 days, but not a lot. Whereas obviously BRM is now a full-time dedicated position. So having said that, this is maybe a little bit naturally following from that, but whatever those versions of those previous slides resonated with you is really kind of how we had to put our heads around, here's why we need BRM. We need BRM because of whatever I chose out of the last 2 pages were the challenges we were facing, either on the business partner side or on the IT side. And just summarizing, that we are regularly hearing the business now use the word order taker. Matter of fact, at the beginning of our IT strategy, which our CIO and our executive team, we refreshed in the last 12 months. In the second paragraph, we literally say IT desires to be an ally to the business. We have been seen a lot in the past as an order taker, and we have capabilities in the the relationship management space. So it is literally in our second paragraph of our strategy now that this is what we do. I don't know that we're quite to the point where BRM would call us a relationship-centered organization from an IT standpoint, but if you think about healthcare, it's kind of in our DNA. Our founders, where the needs of the patient come first, which infers that there is a relationship between a provider and a nurse and a care team and a patient. So, these are the sort of things that have been in our DNA, but we just haven't maybe amplified them as much as we did in our last strategy. So let me dive into the 3 topics here. The first one is really BRMs can help generate business revenue and reduce business costs. That's a big mouthful, and people might say, "Well, I'm waiting to hear you tell me that story, Neal, because I just got to really understand it." But that's one piece of it, and we've got some pretty great examples. It's a journey for us. It's not always just black and white, where you can put a absolute dollar sign number on many things, but we're on that journey. The other thing is we've said basically, it helps optimize IT leadership and specialists in IT's utilization. So that manages IT costs in a lot of what we do. And then ultimately, we believe it's really helped increase our business partner and employee satisfaction. So those are the 3 big drivers where having a BRM in place, we believe, has helped in all of those cases. So this is a slide to kind of just feed into the say, you know, BRMs in our world, as I've kind of put this together and I just sort of lay out what is a BRM, I'll basically suggest that, the concept of BRM in our organization has been to bring sort of leadership to the virtual IT team. If we want to use a sports metaphor, we've used a quarterback in that term. But we've also said that the BRM role may be seen as something already performed. It's often multiple people without a point person. They kind of make it a hobby. And so that's a piece of this that we needed to sort of dispel in this process. And then one of the things that I often say is if somebody were actually to say that the BRM could single-handedly be tied to the delivery of some value, I'd say first of all it's virtually impossible, and second of all I'd say they're not playing their role. Because if they're doing that, that's really not what they were hired to do. They weren't hired to program. They weren't hired to do those kinds of things. They provide leadership, and you'll see some of the words that I describe after this. So, driving towards that first goal of generating revenue and et cetera, and value. The main one of the examples that I pulled was from our BRD, who works with our neurology department. And one of the things that we did was the BRD helped them through a process that we used called application portfolio management. It's application portfolio rationalization in some organizations, but at the end of the day, it's a multi-month exercise that the BRM helps facilitate and gets us output like this, a multi-year IT strategy roadmap. In the case of neurology didn't have one of those. They always were sort of a close cousin to cardiology, and cardiology at Mayo Clinic's got, I think we support them with over 100 applications. And you may be thinking, why haven't you rationalized those? And the answer is because some of the things they do are so specialized that they have convinced leadership that it's worth funding multiple applications. So at any rate, neurology not as near as well developed. So this is an exercise that we went through to help build this roadmap. Then what we did, by the way, that's sorry here. That's section 3 of our strategic relationship plan. So this BRD has done a really nice job of assembling a strategic relationship plan. And this is the section 3, just as a context. And then section 4 of that is really, we like these terms from BRM Institute called a value forecast. So the way we've done that is we've said, what is our goal and what are we trying to accomplish? And then really what are sort of the key measurements that we expect to accomplish? And so 2 of these are laid out on the right. These are things that the neurology department really wanted to accomplish. And to just kind of help, if you kind of tease that out, this exercise, this plan helped deliver a market share measure, which said we would reduce referrals to competitors and increasing access to a growing North America market, price put on that. We'd increase service volumes, number of procedures, and that would translate to an annual net income. In this exercise down here, where we were rationalizing EEG equipment vendors, the goal we said was we think we can simplify applications, which included some number of dollars through vendor cost reconciliation, a reduction in IT and clinical burden, which we think translates to a certain number of revenue and FTE savings. And really, we don't have a hard metric on it. What percent increase or whatever does MD staff satisfaction or reduction in turnover, but it's one of the metrics. It just we haven't had a really good description of that yet. So the next key question then is, well, okay, that's all good, but as I sort of teed up at the beginning, what actions did the BRM take really facilitate the generation of that overall plan? And I commented that they led the implementation. Now we've got a couple of key individuals in our organization that we will call application portfolio management consultants. They're internal players. But in terms of helping serve that up, getting the right people there, teeing up to the business what role they needed to play, and how the things that the BRM had learned about what they were doing, how that resonated and how that needed to be supported. Our BRM really took the lead on that. And he's worked closely with the neurology department and a number of the leaders to really help provide context, because our APM team really doesn't know a lot of the business uniqueness about neurology, but our BRD has developed quite a bit of understanding about them. Matter of fact, our BRD came out of a role in operations that supported neurology. And so as he came to our organization, he can speak neurology pretty well. And so that's a kind of a key success factor. I'll come to that a little bit later on. He helped them set that prioritized set of initiatives to put on the 3-year plan. And his words, which I just took them almost as he said it, he says, I serve as a point of accountability that promotes awareness and adherence to that strategic IT strategic roadmap. He feels accountable to it. We're in the process of establishing sort of an annual look back, look forward, so we can sort of checkpoint on, are we making the progress we need, and what do we got headed into the next year? And so that's a key person, a key role that he plays. And then he really is responsible to ensure that all of us at IT are engaged and focused on these revenue reduction procedures. Maybe in your organization, sometimes there's a whole bunch of work done to put a business case together, but then once the project starts, pretty much everybody's focused on activation of software or something like that, but maybe not as focused upon, wait a minute, if we don't build a design that's really going to project and deliver these value items, in healthcare, it might be reduction of transcription or something like that. Well, then wait a minute. Then we shouldn't just proceed towards a go live. We got to stop and say, did our design do what it was supposed to do? So we say our BRM owns that. They own that process. I'm going to shift over to the second two topics where you can really say we think it another pitch is that we optimize IT leadership and specialist utilization. So basically, here's a couple of our areas of our organization. And quite frankly, we used to have a lot of IT executive time supporting our Center for Digital Health. And so we put a BRM in place in 2021 because basically we call them vice chairs, but they're basically IT vice presidents, um, basically said, I'm spending up to almost 30% a week just with different leaders in this group. I need to offload some of that because I've got all kinds of other places beyond the Center for Digital Health to help. So we brought a BRM and dedicated a BRM to that particular space. And he's very, very grateful because it was going to get to the place where we couldn't serve the customer sufficiently if it was his hobby. We got another example that we were bringing 5 or 6 infrastructure leaders into this research IT subcommittee, air quotes, in case they were kind of needed to be able to support things. And frankly, sometimes the members of that group were a bit annoyed because we often do get into the weeds and we would take meeting agendas off in places that didn't really need to go. And so we put a BRM in place, and that BRM is one person instead of 5. And they really help coordinate, at the right level of detail, the questions. They understand them. Many times they can answer them themselves. Other times they'll, sort them as follow-up. So, again, we took 5 people out of a committee and frankly out of a lot of interaction with research by putting a BRM in place. And another one is the Department of Medicine. And in this case, it's almost a little bit funny to kind of get your head around it, but we weren't spending a lot of time. And then the Department of Medicine would sort of approach IT and say, not quite these words, but essentially, we're going to buy this thing. We need you to support it. Sure, that might happen in your organization. And so we basically said, wait a minute, we need to get in this process. And just because the business area is not calling during the process doesn't mean that there isn't engagement needed. It turns out that there was quite a bit of engagement. As I reached out to our leader of our Department of Medicine, he said, we just wish we could get more IT at the table in the early stages of this planning. So our BRM is now engaged with the Department of Medicine Transformation, Clinical Transformation Office. We weren't very closely related to them, but now they're totally connected. And we use them to kind of figure out, how do we use our IT architects and how do we pull them into the right places to help define things and design them up front. So a couple of examples there, could certainly continue to roll through other ones, but I just picked a few that I thought were maybe the most interesting. And this one is where I've just suggested this is my third place where really we can increase both business partner satisfaction as well as IT satisfaction. This one is really targeted essentially at our business partner satisfaction, and we've had a voice of the customer program in place for several years. We went through a little bit of an overhaul on that in the last few months, and we've now got maybe it's consistent with the spirit of relationship that instead of sending them a survey monkey, I personally engage with them for 30 minutes and ask them a couple of key questions: what's working, what's not working, give us an NPS type score, and what should we be thinking about moving forward. Some of the early results, we just started that this year in Q2. Some of the early results generally were, first of all, the comment was, thanks for holding this meeting. We think that's valuable. And nursing was, these are straight out of the feedback that we got from them. The BRM is a great navigator and it's a tremendous strength. We need, and we've needed this. In pharmacy, it's, they're always willing to help and they run great traffic control. For the Department of Medicine, they just absolutely love their BRM, their BRD, and said it's a great partner. IT's now at the table, and they bring new ideas to light that we maybe weren't thinking of before, and they've really been instrumental in bridging the business partner and IT conversations. We had one of our BRDs is working with Mayo Collaborative Services, which is really kind of who handles our very large reference lab. When health systems need to have tests run that aren't really in their wheelhouse, they'll ship those tests out to places like lab companies, but then we run a very large reference lab as well. And in that business, we're also doing a really large biopharma project. And the quote from that key leader was, "They're just filling a crucial role." They're right in the business planning for that with us in our organization. And the other one that was really interesting was one of our business areas said, and it's been a couple of years ago, approached me and said, I want a dedicated BRM and I'll fund it. And so we've had a couple of instances where the business has come forward and said, I watched what's going on and I've talked to thus and such over in another space. And I know you're in the process of rolling this all out, Neal, but I want to get in the front of the line. I'll fund it. Moving very quickly here, the outcome in terms of increased BRM satisfaction, what I did is I just pulled up the employee satisfaction survey, and I'm just going to let the colors speak for themselves. I'm very proud of the fact that we have not as large of a team in the BRM space. You can kind of see the number of records in this column, but I heard one of our leaders say, well, yeah, their scores are better because they got less people. And it's like, wait a minute, less people just means the numbers go up or go down really fast. So you can see we're proud of our team. We think a lot of people have sort of said, this was the job that I've sort of felt like I've built my career for. So there's a lot of satisfaction in our BRM team. So here's a little bit of a money slide that kind of pulls together a bunch of things from the last page, and it's kind of the hip pocket comments, because I think in many times all of our organizations haven't just been we haven't been living under a rock. I mean, we've had to engage with people on the business side. So the question that I think a CIO might say is, yeah, I got people that do all that. Well, why do I need a BRM? There's other IT leaders. There's another IT leader that can do that. And at the end of the day, this is essentially the message. It's really about time and focus. It's not their day job. Or sorry, it's not a hobby. It's their day job. In our organization, our BRMs don't have direct reports. This is a individual contributor role, and so they don't have HR administrative responsibilities, et cetera. I know some people hybridize their BRM role and they have a business partner and then they supervise some BRMs. So that bullet might not fully apply to them, but in our organization it does. They've developed a lot of knowledge and ability to link business needs with technology capabilities. They have a disposition and a desire to foster relationships. And they just really have an interest. They said that in many cases, this is the job that they think their career is built for. So when I post positions, I don't have a problem getting applicants. And the last one I filled, there were 4 applicants, and the panel said, all four of these people could do this job. Wow, this is really a great panel. And then we had to kind of work our way through that, but it's been great. Um, they know how to network across IT, and not everybody does that, and some other IT leaders do it, but it's key to them being successful. Many of our BRMs are from internal hires, a few external, but many or most internal. And they really got the respect of the business partners as sort of a go-to senior leader in IT. If you kind of take a look, Mayo Clinic has introduced it across 50%. In other smaller business partner areas, we have another IT leader is playing a limited BRM role today. So what we basically said is we are going to sort of need some other leaders, and those other leaders will play this role of a BRM. We kind of kept the previous tag, which we called an IT CRM, but that's how we differentiate, is that if it's driven to need the things here, and they're our largest business partners I showed you at the beginning, we then have built and dedicated a role to a person to do that. The BRM, in terms of making the case that there's a dual focus, they're focused on strategy and as well as operations and execution. When we were first getting out of the box with this, there were a few places that kind of said, I'm not sure IT's earned the right to come and talk to me about my strategy. Help me deliver the stuff that you've already got implemented and do it well. Now, fortunately, we haven't heard that for a while, but you go back a number of years, it was important that we not only sort of came knocking on the door, sort of wanting to come in and be a partner on the business forward-looking side, but we had to handle that as well. I've also educated to speak about the fact that the verbs of BRM are verbs like advising, leading, collaborating, navigating, coordinating. Those are the attributes of action for a BRM in our organization. We encourage BRMs to do warm handoffs. In many cases, people might say, if I can find the IT delivery person, I can't own every issue. So my job is to hand it off and monitor it. So I know it's there and I keep my fingers on it, but I won't personally go solve. Once in a while I will, if I think I need to sort of duty as assigned for the day and have credibility, but that's not really my goal. That's not my goal. Couple of other things you can see. Last final point we'll say to people is, if you're just not sure about something with IT, just call your BRM. And so we've been added to an awful lot of our key customers, committees, advisory groups, decision-making bodies, just because that's how we're connected on a regular basis. Coming in for a landing here, I would say in our organization, and I'll speak more about this at the BRM Connect conference about our journey, but I'd make the statement to say start small and gain success, and not try to cover the whole spectrum of BRMs and of business partners, and target friends of IT where there's certain high need and the ability to see wins. I say look for solid matches, and the reality is that we don't tend to hire BRMs from the outside, and that's not because we're not willing to give other people opportunities. It's that one of the major things that our organization will say is, I don't want to try to navigate the 3,000 person organization of IT at Mayo Clinic. I need somebody to help do that with me and bring them to the table. And so their ability to understand the organization and then ideally own and understand aspects of the industry that whether it's neurology or whatever, helps make them the most effective. And then I could spend an hour on this topic, but a great success factor has been to just literally partner with the business. And this comes out of my playbook as a vendor. I am generally seeking the department chair, the most senior person in that group that we have. And I'm saying, will you partner with me to recruit this individual? And what's great about it is that they're vested in the person we select. And it's been, amazing. It just gives us tailwind, because it's hard to find a business partner that doesn't love their BRM. Most of the time where we'll run into a little bit of a dynamic is that then that person makes a career change, promotion, whatever, and a new person comes in that wasn't a part of the recruit, and then we have to kind of go through and, if you will, sort of resell BRM to that organization. And my last point is, make it a deliberate launch. I would say in the late 20 teens, we had BRM really more covering those geographies. And it was in 2021 when we really sort of put the foot on the gas. And I and our CIO went to a department meeting and pitched to the organization, to the IT organization, here's what BRM is. And that really was what sort of got us rolling and got a lot of folks sort of excited about what we're doing. BRM Connect, I'll talk more about our journey and unpack some of that. And you'll see kind of we went through different pivot points, and it's been a good story to be able to think through how we are in many cases making this shift. I think we'll continue on a journey to being a trusted advisor. I don't know that I would say we've fully arrived in many of these spaces, but we are rapidly advancing. And the other thing I'll talk a bit about is we're leveraging the BRM concepts and the BRM Institute to enable a lot of our practices. And so I want to do some real hands-on practical description of things we've built, and many of them in partnership with a leading industry BRM consultant in Lead the Pack Consulting, as well as just working directly with BRM Institute, generally via that consultant to pull best practices, et cetera. And I'll talk a little bit there about sort of where we're headed next with BRM at Mayo Clinic. So I better take a little bit of a breath here, Mariah and team. But I think hopefully if you've been able to kind of watch any chats or questions, glad to move to any Q&A with the group.
All right, I'm gonna let people process and come up with questions. We do have one clarification from Suzanne. She wanted to get clarification about the 4 questions, what's working, not working, NPS score, and moving forward. Were those questions geared towards BRMs or IT as a whole? So if you go back, go ahead.
Yeah, very good question. I'll see if I can, am I still presenting?
We can see the deck, yeah.
I bet, yeah, maybe. Well, I tell you what, I don't know that I need the deck for this particular question. It's a great question, and what the answer is, we asked the question about IT broadly. And what we did was when we said the first question was what's working and what's not working, what I committed to my CIO was that I wanted to get some really objective feedback about IT. Now, almost every time we ask that question, and every time, I'd say 80 to 90% of the time we ask that question, I mean, I've been around Mayo Clinic long enough now that I consider myself kind of an old guy as opposed to a new guy. So I know a lot of these people across our whole organization. And so they know the function that I have. Many of them helped recruit them. And the first comment they'll often say is, I love my BRM. You're not going to take them away, are you? You know, this is not a concern, is it? So often I get that as early feedback. But the goal of that survey was really to help, my boss will say, Neal, I know everybody loves your team. They're so happy they have a BRM, but I would like to get feedback about how IT is doing, not just about how BRM is doing. So we've left it broad. We've left it very open intentionally by not saying, how do we be an ally? That was one of the ways we thought we might do it. And we said, no, let's just approach it wide open. So we leave it to the business partner to take response to those questions, whatever's top of their mind, whatever's most important to them. And I'll tell you the reason why is because, and again, some of this comes out of my playbook as a vendor previous, but ultimately, what are we all doing in IT? We want happy users of technology. We want people that think it's hugely valuable, that they're getting a ton of return on the investment that they make in technology, and we want them to say that. So this is a little bit of a way of trying to understand if they're going to say something, how do we understand what they're going to say? And I know that all sounds so just obvious, but we decided to do it as a 30-minute informal conversation, then sending them a survey because I wanted to reach out to these senior most people that helped me recruit the BRM and say, how's IT doing at supporting the Department of Neurology, et cetera. So hope that answers the question. Appreciate it. Appreciate the question. It was a tough, we had to answer that question and we decided to make it broader.
All right. I'm going to take questions first from anybody that wants to raise their hand and ask the question, but I do have some questions in chat and they all seem to be kind of a follow-up. So, or Kareem Hawkins, you want to raise your hand?
Yes. Good morning, folks. Just a curiosity question. I noticed, Neal, that you mentioned business relationship directors. For your organization, is that more of a senior level BRM, or do you have BRMs as well? And also, I'm curious to your thoughts around when it comes to leadership, how that position title helps in terms of building that relationship, especially at a more strategic level.
Well, you played into even some conversations we've been having in the last weeks and last couple of months. The short answer is, I think many people do feel that if they have the director title, it makes them more credible. I think many times that's often the case. How many vendors do you work with, or everybody's a vice president? It's kind of just sometimes part of what organizations do. If you look at the profile, when we originally laid this out, it wasn't clear exactly what we would do. But when we started recruiting people, we and to make this job family kind of work, we have tried to create alignments between the BRM job family and other leadership roles in the organization. So people can clearly say, if I take on a business relationship director role, is that a promotion for me, or is that a lateral move for me? That we ended up kind of doing that in our organization. And I would say 80% of the people on my team that do BRM are business relationship directors. And I think that kind of, I don't know if that was fully by initial intent, but if you look at the profiles of those individuals, even most of them have 10, 15, 20 years of IT experience. Many of them were leaders in IT. And if they weren't leaders in IT, they were leaders in operations. I have a couple of them, like I mentioned, from neurology, that were leaders in operations. So they when I described a whole bunch of those things, they carry themselves in a way that is relevant and effective, and just to cut to the chase, relevant and effective with leaders. And it's, I like to suggest, and I think our team would appreciate me saying that, I think they've earned their business relationship director title, because they carry with them those acumen. And so we've tried to be a little careful that it's not because we think the title makes them more credible. We think they're more credible, and hence we want them to be presented forward with the title. Sorry, I hope that made sense, but
It does.
Yeah, the short answer to your question is, I think most people in the role, several of our senior, we have a business relationship manager, senior business relationship manager, a business relationship director, and a senior business relationship director. And those senior business relationship directors were directors. They would be either directors or assistant vice presidents in most IT organizations. They are running. We have two of them. One of them runs our international practice, and one of them runs our lab business. And the main criteria about a director to a senior director was the amount of external facing work with vendors, contracts, and that kind of work. So that was the main trigger when I helped design that job family, to say that's an additional skill. And our gentleman that runs our international practice spent years helping us with Microsoft contracts and Google contracts and everything. And so he has that acumen, as well as just all the other things you'd sort of think of as a good, solid business relationship director. I'll pause my comments there, Kareem. Thanks for the question.
Absolutely.
All right. Aaron has added a great session, and then several people have jumped on. That's why I'm taking his question. You mentioned you had to explain BRM to the IT teams as part of your rollout or early adoption in some areas. Can you give an overview of these slides or what you presented? Maybe add this to your session at BRM Connect. And then we've had several people saying, yes, this is what we're going through right now. And so can you add on to that?
I'd be happy to do that. And in many cases, a little bit of what you heard me say today, we didn't have the neurology use case, for example, at the time when we were sort of just getting out of the gates. So, at that time, um, our general pitch had to do an awful lot with um, those aspects of this presentation where we talked about wanting to commit people to working on the relationship and being able to understand all facets of the relationship and having people that were desiring to do that job as opposed to sort of de facto that job. When we were first, but before we put these positions in place, it wasn't uncommon for the IT senior manager or director. We use kind of funny academic titles here at Mayo Clinic, and we're in the process of evaluating them, but it's a little bit of our legacy from the clinical space. But they would be the equivalent of senior managers or directors that, in addition to delivering the functions for nursing, also were responsible to kind of reach out and manage that relationship. And they handled it generally pretty reactively because they had their day job, as I sort of described. And so part of our story was, the industry is taking a pretty significant step to turn this into a real ITIL discipline. And we were just going through a major ITIL reconfiguration and transformation in the early part of the 20 teens. And so I think this showed up on the ITIL map in 2011, and we were diving into it early on in 2013, 2014, right about when BRM Institute was forming. And so, we said we want to make this a formal discipline, frankly, like many of us see our vendors do. Our vendors don't make us navigate their organization. Our vendors generally give us a key person, and that vendor is expected to kind of learn about us and what we do, and then be that connector and be that focal point to help us with a lot of things. And so those are some of the main points that kind of got us launched into the presentation that we made. I think it was February of 2021 at our department meeting. So Aaron, thanks for the comments, and others, thanks for the comments. I have some of those things actually as I think about the pivot points of Mayo Clinic in the last, the BRM at Mayo Clinic in the last 10 years, as that being really one of the key pivot points. And I really am looking forward to unpacking that some more at the conference.
Awesome. So Renee asks, does every BRM you have in your organization attend BRM training, BRMP, CBRM? With your close relationship with the lead of the pack, how many of your BRMs are trained?
Well, we were not BRM certified until we started that process, but everybody on our team, when they join, especially if they're a new BRM, likelihood is they don't have a BRMP. Like PMP has been around for 99 years, so we require, including myself, went through BRMP training, and I require that. I don't require it as a prerequisite, but we require it when you take the position. I've had people in our organization say, is it appealing if I go get my BRMP as an applicant? And I say, certainly, it demonstrates interest and it demonstrates direction. At the end of the day, I can't say that that will be the only factor that decides the selection, but we're gonna require it. So I've got probably a half a dozen people that have reached out, and I funded if they wanted to take the BRMP, because I just think it's great for the discipline and for the awareness at Mayo Clinic. So
the answer is supposed to be yes.
It is for the case of BRMP. Beyond that, we haven't required it. We've said many people have pursued it. many. Some have pursued it and gone to get it, but I absolutely require it for anybody who's coming to take a BRM position.
Nice. Okay. Victoria is raising her hand. Victoria.
Yes, hello everyone. I have a question which I don't know if you're going to be able to answer or if that's going to be more Maria to answer. I can see that lots of people interested in the BRMP or being BRMP certified are within the IT sector. So I know that there are other communities for health and everything, but my point will be if you were to pitch to introduce this role, those missions to another sector, what would you use? Do you have any nuggets, any suggestions for that?
So, like, for instance, making the pitch to HR, is that what you're asking? Like, let's pretend
HR or your manager, if you're suggesting this as a training certification that could support your role.
I don't know, Marian, you were going to jump in. Is there something you wanted to say?
No, go ahead and take it because I was going to have Sam jump in. So Sam, be ready.
Okay. You know, interesting enough, when we were launching this, our HR area at Mayo Clinic had a position that they called an HR service partner. They would liaise to different areas, and to this day, I think they still have generally the concept. I think the scope of their role has evolved and changed. Some are more on HR issues, some are more on recruiting, etc. But I think many of the concepts that are here would apply. I think the difference, if I were to pick HR, is that we have these complex multi-year, multi-quarter initiatives that are expensive in IT, and they need to have generally more and more, they need to demonstrate that they've got the value to be achieved well defined, even if it's not all about money, whatever it is. And that to me has become why BRMs are increasingly valuable in the IT space. I think, sure, HR implements IT projects, but that's an area of BRM where we're helping them do that. But in the case of HR, I think just it's much more. This is an oversimplification, but it's more transactional by comparison. And so I think it would be important in my mind that you could pick up a bunch of the pieces in this. I think the things about having a dedicated role and a professional that understands the business area that they're helping with. Are they recruiting highly technical people? Are they recruiting project managers? Are they recruiting help desk people? What is their area? So there's still an understanding of the audience that they serve and become familiar with it so that they're really a great agent for that business, for that area that I think much of it still applies. It probably would just, like I said, it probably needs some tuning. You'd go back to the first slides of, what problem are we trying to solve, and describe that in your mind and say, does a BRM fit, or does a BRM from the service provider fit? I think in many cases it will. It's just, I think that's what I would do is I'd go back to that and solve that mapping.
Okay, let's see if we can. Thank you. Okay, and you can send more questions to info@ if you need more clarification on that, Victoria. I'm going to see if I can get Muslim Mohammed's question in really quick. Who does the senior business relationship director reports? Who does the senior business relationship director reports to at Mayo Clinic? And then he follows up with, in other words, does it help reporting directly to the IT provider head in managing the business partners and IT providers?
So is the first question, does it report to IT or does it report to the business? Is that maybe the first, is that the first question? I think the assumption is it reports to IT. Is that right, Marian? If I'm just trying to make sure I can tease the question.
I could just clarify that, Neal. Firstly, great presentation. I'm from a healthcare organization, been in healthcare industry all my life, and I really appreciated the entire talk, and I could directly relate to it. And the question which was bothering me from a couple of days was, does the BRM reporting to the IT provider head is more beneficial both to organization and the BRM, because they can get things done quicker and be more efficient, effective to at their roles? Or is it the usual classical hierarchy that there is a BRM department and there's a head for it, and then they report to that head, and probably that head is not a full-time BRM director, and so there's always a disconnect which happens at what BRM wants to do, with the business partners, or would like to serve the business partners. So, I find that, great concern at a workplace.
Okay, let me try to offer some comments and see if I'm understanding your question. At Mayo Clinic, we set up a separate customer organization or business partner organization, which is one of the areas that I lead, and I report to our corporate CIO. The other members of the cabinet lead our infrastructure. One is our CISO, one's our chief technology officer. So there's about 6 of us, and I report into our CIO for purposes of, we call it the customer org. And BRM is a piece of that. There's some other pieces. So from that standpoint, maybe in your language, it is a little bit of it is a BRM captured body that is an expertise discipline that I provide leadership to, and that we work as a community to continue to mature and advance what we do, as opposed to, say, distributing BRMs all across the IT organization and have them report up into different functions. We decided to centralize them in one space so that we could, quite frankly, because I kind of, if you use the words for today, I pitched this, and it really wasn't until 21 that Chris Ross would say, "Okay, Neal, you finally sold me. You've been working at it here for a couple of years, and you finally sold me, and let's get it funded." And so I was the guy doing the pitching. And so I think because of my past experience and some of the messages put forward, it was sort of put on me to build. And so that's a lot of why the legacy of what we've done. I honestly think that's still the right thing to do, though, because the way we've solved it is just like the chief technology officer and the CISO report to our CIO. We're not watchdogs to the organization, but at the end of the day, if we're not serving a particular business partner effectively, I don't have a conflict of interest where I can't share that. My CIO cares deeply about that. He also came out of industry, and he wants to know those facts. And so if nothing else, maybe I feel a little bit of, organizational insulation that I work directly for him. And my goal is to make sure that we get good scores and that we are highly esteemed by IT, not just BRMs. BRMs are an agent, but I want IT to be highly esteemed. And so that's where I sit in this process, is to help figure out how to make sure that if we're not serving certain business partners well, that we surface that, we understand that, and then we kind of go after solving it. I don't know. Did I answer your question? I hope that I did. I'm not sure if that was all of your question.
Of course. That was really, near perfect to what I wanted to hear. And I think it's very beneficial for, what my thought process was, and I'm more clear now. Thank you so much.
All right, great.
Thank you. So Neal, do you have time to take more questions?
I am willing to go past a bit if there are questions. So I see that there are a few. So I allowed for a little bit of time here to be able to do that if that was valuable.
All right, we've got Ken who has a question. We'll follow up with the ones in chat, but we'll take the in-person questions now.
Thanks, Neal, for the presentation. Question for you. I actually been in healthcare too, not too far away, down in Madison, from Minneapolis, Rochester.
You're Madison, not Marshfield. Okay.
UW Madison, yeah, close. Yeah. Do you ever find your BRMs facilitating a little bit more than just IT? So like say cross-departmental, I mean, for most everything we do these days, IT is the foundation. Computers are the foundation to do anything cross-departmental, but saying helping departments beyond do a little bit, IT is a part of it, but the bigger part is some sort of cross-departmental. Maybe IT isn't the big piece of it, but it's a small piece, but they're helping out with those relationships across groups to build synergies and get some cost savings of sharing of resources or something like that.
I think the short answer is yes, and it varies. The first organization group that comes to mind, and again, every organization's different, but in our organization, all of the medical devices that are bedside and the MRI devices and the other big iron equipment that basically help take care of patients fits in a group in our organization called Health Technology Management. And Health Technology Management had a stint where it reported to IT, but then the decision was that it didn't. And so, but many times there's a line that's blurred between, well, you, my wife's a nurse, and she's a classic. She's a nurse administrator, but she's a nurse, and she doesn't want to try to figure out things about technology. And in her mind, it's all IT. So, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it is. They all think it's all IT. So we find ourselves having to go, okay, organizationally, we don't actually own this piece. So many of our BRMs, BRDs are reaching out to that particular organization. Media Support Services handles a lot of our infrastructure and conference rooms. Again, we handle the endpoints, but a lot of that stuff, just for legacy reasons, was set up that way. And so sometimes we're bridging to those people as well. And the other thing is sometimes we're bridging across clinical areas. It gets more complicated, but there are times when one clinical area, nursing is a classic example. There's a lot of workflow that nurses support. It's a big horizontal piece, from people registering to people getting, roomed, to getting procedures, to getting admitted to the hospital. That's a whole workflow for patient access. And many times we might be working with nursing, and, some of the solutions that they have are touching all those pieces and have to correlate with those pieces. So that's the first one that comes to mind, is nursing has just a lot of interconnects, and our BRD there finds themselves having a lot of conversations with hospital operations and clinic operations and other areas, ancillaries like pharmacy, et cetera. So it's a little bit of the attitude, I think, is what does it take to get the job done? And so that's kind of what they do. And my guess is your organization is probably pretty similar. It adds some complications, because if it's an organization that's outside of IT, now you got to figure out, are there things that, we have less influence over, or sorry, we have less control over, and we have to manage through influence. And so I don't know, I'm kind of passionate about that topic, so I'll stop my comments there. But it is a challenge in healthcare, but I think that's, again, part of the beauty of the BRM role, because there are, in so many words, no boundaries. It's what does it take to kind of get things figured out in our world. Maybe similar in yours.
All
Thanks for
right. Thank you, everybody, for staying on. Thank you, Neal, and the Mayo crew. We always appreciate the time you give back to the community, and I know that they appreciate it. We're looking forward to hearing more from you all at BRM Connect in October. Thank you, Neal. We've had fun working with you this time, and we will see everybody next time. Thank you all.